She said, the problem that we have is we don't have Christian people who are showing up at the PTO meetings or being involved in the various councils in the school. And she said, none of you people are involved in any of these. It's only the other side. And they're making all the decisions for everybody because none of you guys are involved. That's what she told me. She said, I want you people to be involved. But here's the problem. The people that are actually making the decisions are only hearing ever one side of the argument. That's all they're hearing. So they make decisions based on what they're hearing. And we flipped that. Now we're driving what's going on in our school.
Ladies and gentlemen, Hebrews and Shebrews, welcome to the Life Podcast. Today, we're talking to my friend Eric Coe. He also runs True Roots Ministries. That comes on the back of years of being one of the pastors at a group here in Ohio. And before that, running his own group out of his house for years. And in doing all of that, Coe went through a lot of stages that people go through when they become Torah observant Christians. And he is going to talk to us about some of those stages that, maybe he wishes he could have avoided. Also, if you don't know about Truth Tracts, that is something that we kickstarted last year and that we're now producing. They're illustrated pamphlets that go over what I would like to say the 5 key lifestyle differences between Torah observant Christians and mainstream Christians. Those would be the Sabbath, observing the feast days, eating clean meat instead of unclean meat, seeing ourselves, saved believers, as being part of Israel instead of Gentiles, and wearing tzitzit. And in that one, I actually go over our whole sovereign moral code that we get from the Torah. That's what those are. They're very short little tracts. They're very inexpensive, so you can hand them out to anyone who might be interested. You can get them at thewaydoc.com/truthtracts. If you love what we're doing here, guys, then like it, share it, subscribe, hit the bell, give us 5 stars somewhere. It helps us get the word out to other people so that more people can see what we're doing. Well, Eric, welcome to the Life Podcast. Thank you for being here, man.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Hey, I'm glad. Well, it's an honor to know you, man. Luckily, off camera, we know each other.
Yes.
So full disclosure.
We have been around each other a good bit now, I think. Yeah. We grew
Less
up,
than I'd like, but
we grew up almost like 5 miles from each other, maybe 2 miles as the crow flies, and didn't know each other until we met each other down here.
Yeah.
Down the road, I guess, not down here.
And now we happen to be filming in the house that's right next to where you grew up, right?
I can actually see the house I grew up in from this window, which is very surreal for me. I don't get down here as much as I would like. My grandma lives right up the road from you. Man, there were a lot of things when your mom came to our house the first time, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I live here," and I'm like, "No, you live like a mile from my grandma."
It's crazy. They're on the same road. So it's a small world.
Very small world. I think the Father connected us for a reason. I do.
Well, it leads into the first question, which is almost always the same. And it's, will you tell us a little bit about your testimony and eventually how you came into the Torah?
Yeah, definitely. Try to make it quick. So I grew up in a normal Christian home, predominantly Baptist. We went back and forth between a Baptist church and my grandma's Methodist church. Was a good kid. I wasn't, a bad kid. I was into sports and everything. Grew up right over there. And I was rebellious like a lot of kids are, and always knew, I would say, about the Lord. Didn't necessarily know the Lord. Thought I did, I think, and lived a life, a lot of things that kids do when they're young. I was into sports and things like that, and got into drinking when I was in college, and just lived that college lifestyle, and then ended up reconnecting with my elementary school sweetheart, Samantha, who I later married. And so at that time, I was I was drinking, smoking cigarettes, smoking weed. That was about the extent of it. But we were young and trying to figure things out. And within a month after a month after we got married, I immediately the Lord just impressed upon me, that my whole life had to change. I had had some things that happened along the way prior to that. I had a sales job and I walked into this business and there were two ladies in there and they look up at me and they said, we've been waiting on you, and sat me down and they started praying over me and prophesying and different things. And this was at the time, I wasn't born again at that point. I was born again in July of 2007, from really a head knowledge, I think, and to giving myself totally to the Lord. And that from that moment was a whirlwind. I had a job at the time and I worked 2 to 10, and I had a lot of time. If I worked really hard, I could get my work done and I'd have, 2 or 3 hours to just sit there and read. And I was just devouring the scriptures and devouring books and spending a lot of time in the evenings, just kind of poring over everything that I could get my hands on related to the scriptures. And I had started to come to the conclusion that the Sabbath was, it was still valid for today. And
how long of a time is there between when you were born again and that point? And also, if we could zoom in on the born again part, yes. What do you mean 2 women were waiting for you at your sales job? Or at your job? How did that happen? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I walked into this business and there were 2 ladies sitting in the waiting room. They actually owned this small business and I was in there trying to sell them something and they just sat me down and said, the Lord showed us that you were going to show up today. And they gave me a series of things that the Lord had commissioned for my life, and told me some things about my grandfather that nobody would know, to confirm what it was that they were saying. Ultimately, I don't like to say this too often because I hear this so much in some circles, these prophecies, and a lot of them are just wild and extravagant. But the way that it happened really left me reeling and running, to be honest with you, from the Lord. It was another couple years before I was actually born again, truly born again.
So it rocked you. It was like,
really
what
rocked
is this?
Me.
They're telling me stuff I don't know.
One of the things that the lady had said was, I see you're going to be speaking to millions of people. And it really scared me. So, I wasn't ready for that. And I always knew I was your classic rebellious Christian kid who was going to go and live his life and then come back to the Lord on my own terms. And I was always afraid of being the Christian guy. I was, whatever you want to call it, popular in school, and I was good at sports and things like that. And that's what I had built my identity around. And when I had gotten into college, I didn't really have that anymore. And that led me into just drinking and, dumb stuff that college kids do. But I never wanted to be the awkward Christian guy who made people uncomfortable. And that was just embarrassing for me because my ego was in the way, and my own insecurities were hiding a lot of things about myself that I had to cover it up with a mask and make myself something that I'm not, which really kind of showed up again, I think, when I later on got into the Torah. So I think we're all just, we've got these inferiorities and insecurities that if we don't truly get healed by the Lord and allow him to make use of those things. And I've come to believe that a lot of times those are the things that he's going to use to really advance his kingdom through people, are the things that we're afraid of and trying to hide. That's the way it's worked for me.
This episode of the Life Podcast is brought to you by The Way documentary, The Truth, Reformation 2.0 Apologetics book, and Truth Tracks. The Way documentary tells the story of our movement. This is the story of people who were trading Easter ham for Passover lamb and Sunday church for Saturday Sabbath, all in an effort to live like their Savior. It dives into their stories through their own voices and into the history and theology that show how the church got to where it is today. The Truth, Reformation 2.0, is the only book of its kind, an all-encompassing theological treatise that answers every question a mainstream Christian might have about why you want to keep Torah. And finally, Truth Tracks are small comics, beautifully illustrated, that use stories and scripture to remind Christians that once we are saved by grace through faith, we are called to live and do the instructions of Yah, his Torah. If you want to learn more about any of these products, go to thewaydoc.com. That's theway, D-O-C, like documentary.com.
So a few years after that experience with the ladies, you get born again. And then how long between then and when you started noticing the Sabbath was maybe not?
It wasn't very long. And I was in a different job at the time. And I've told you this story before, but I worked with a guy who was a pagan. He called himself a witch. And which is, it's going to be awkward probably for me to say this, but I really liked him. He was honest, at least as far as I could tell. He was very vulnerable about his feelings and beliefs, and he had grown up very poor, and as a kid, he was going to this church, and his parents didn't go, and he was invited to go to this youth group, and he was going, and he was really enjoying it. And he had a really bad experience with an adult in the church came up to him and said, well, your parents don't go here and contribute to this church. You shouldn't be here. And it just crushed him and sent him down this road which ultimately led him into paganism, and he was a witch. So we're talking, and we would have, when I got born again, I mean, it was full octane. I mean, I went from lights off to lights on overnight. And I guess that's kind of a little bit of how my personality works. I'm either all in or all out a lot of times. And so we would have these conversations about our beliefs. And I'm, in my mind, I'm working an angle on him. And what's happening is actually the Lord's working an angle on me through him by creating an offense, which he does a lot to us. Which perhaps, I don't know, maybe this interview will be an offense to people that creates something that the Father can use. But so he tells me, he says, we're sitting there one night, and he's like, the funny thing about you Christians, you celebrate all of my holidays, all of my holy days. And what he meant was Christmas and Easter and all of the things that you've addressed in your videos. And I set off to prove him wrong. I mean, I was competitive. I'm going to prove this guy wrong. And diligently went in to find a way to bury him from a theological argument standpoint, and found out he was right. And that kind of rocked my world. And that was around the time where I was starting to, it was all happening at the same time, where I was challenged on these things that I had grown up that were very near and dear to me and a central part of my upbringing that now had no anchor that I could build my life around, because I saw the false, I saw the truth, I guess, and the falsehood that had been put forth about it, and there was no going back for me. So like I'm not the type of person who will just do something because it looks good or sounds like, I'm a very practical person. And if I don't see a value in it, then I'm just not going to do it. And that was the same way with the feast days or with, Christmas and Easter, your normal traditional Christian holidays. At the same time, I was questioning the Sabbath just simply by reading the Ten Commandments. It just, all of a sudden, all of these things just didn't make any sense. And so at the time, I was working Tuesday through Saturday. And I knew enough to know that It's an honorable thing for a man to provide for his family. And so I went to the Lord and was just very honest with him and said, I'm not quitting my job. If you want me to honor the Sabbath, I will, but you've got to do this. You've got to make it happen for me. And the very next working day would have been a Tuesday. I went in, my boss calls me into the office and he's like, hey, David got a promotion. He's moving on. Do you want to change your shift to Sunday through Thursday? I mean, we're talking the very next working day after I had challenged the Lord and put him on the spot about that. And it wasn't from a haughty standpoint. It was from I'm not quitting my job because it's honorable for me to provide for my family. But I see that you're doing this and I'm willing to go along with it, but I need you to meet me where I'm at.
Wow. And he did.
That was the beginning of, okay, now I was off to the races on just trying to devour the Torah and I was on a full-blown sprint for a couple years there, devouring every Torah-based book that I could possibly get, listening to, at the time, the smartphones weren't as prevalent as they are now. So I was downloading stuff off the internet and burning CDs and listening to them in my car. And I had been connected with a man who was there at the very beginning of the birth of the Hebrew Roots movement. The Lord had called him over to be a missionary in Cyprus. And he was a bit of a mentor for me and helped me stay grounded in a lot of things. And he's since passed away. And that's what got me into the Torah, was being challenged on Christian holidays and trying to prove somebody wrong, and found out they were right.
Did you ever talk to that guy again about that?
And as a matter of fact, we still, from time to time, I'll send him a text and say, hey, how you doing? And we'll still correspond. And I still pray for him. And I think it really broke me when I heard about his experience of what happened in the body, because I think there's a lot of people who go through those kinds of things. And that took him down a road where ultimately I benefited from it. But my prayer is that the Lord would return that back to him and show him mercy and bring him into the kingdom. So,
well, hopefully he will, if he hasn't already. That's
my prayer for him. Yeah. I have love in my heart for him, which, you wouldn't, it's like, friends, or I love a witch. It's kind of an odd thing to say, but that's the reality of it.
Man, did he tell you why he called himself a witch and he's a man? Like, I thought only women were witches. Like, did he say, is it warlock or something?
Yeah, that's what I always thought. And I don't know if there's denominations, and I never really got too much into it.
Okay. I'm just curious.
That he was a witch. He was not a warlock. He said warlocks that was like a stupid term that was made up, and so anyways. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Wow, okay. So you came into the Torah, and then you were getting everything you could, and what happened then in your journey?
It all went very, very fast. And I guess to just preface this, it wasn't like I started from ground zero. I grew up in a Christian home, had been trained in the scriptures through my church, and I went to, a local Baptist church here in town. And so all of the things that I had up here were then connected here, and so I was spending 2 to 4 hours a day reading and studying, and did that for about a year. And then I just really started beating my family members over the head with everything Torah. And I, become a Torah terrorist and a Torah mentor, and started, I would show up to Christmas at my family's house and, make rude comments and it just was it was a very immature thing to do, I think. now, because I've come to the conclusion that it's only the Father that can open somebody's eyes to this. You can't argue somebody into believing the Torah is valid for today. That's my belief.
I've come to that conclusion as well. And you are not the only person this is almost like unanimous. Everyone goes, depending on their personality, they'll be more or less outspoken. But there's a period where it's like, why doesn't everyone see this since I see it? You know? Would you have any thoughts about that experience for anyone coming into this, or maybe how to avoid it?
You know, I wouldn't listen to anybody if they would have been in my shoes, if I would be in my shoes instructing myself back in 2008 when I had fire coming out of my tailpipes about the Torah. I would have looked at myself and said, well, you're just backslidden and you've gone soft. And I don't think I would have heard it. And
so there's nothing you can do to avoid it. So basically people just need to keep their mouths shut for 3 years or 4 years.
That would be my recommendation. Yeah.
I don't know. I think you're right.
Right. I mean, you know, if I look back on the whole journey, I mean, you know, most of my family now walks in the Torah, my immediate family, you know, my mom and dad and my sister and her family and my aunts and uncles and cousins. And so for the most part, my immediate family has come around to it. You know, my grandma still kind of thinks we're goofy, but she recognizes that we haven't given up Messiah. And that, I think, was something that they were concerned about. I don't think the Lord's in as big a hurry as we are. And so when my eyes were open to it, because of being raised in a Baptist imminency ideology, everything was immediate and urgent for me. So in the Baptist world, you know, you're trying to, in terms of evangelizing somebody, you're trying to plant the seed, water it, get some sunlight on it, grow it up, and reap a harvest all in a 9-minute conversation. And I think that carried with me with the Torah was, you know, I'd go into Kroger and somebody would say, you know, Merry Christmas. And I would spend 4 minutes while I was in front of the cash register telling them all of the reasons why I didn't celebrate Christmas and that they shouldn't be either. And I would walk away from that situation feeling kind of good about myself because I just buried somebody in an argument, only to have them looking at me perplexed, like, I have no idea what this person just said to me, but they're very passionate about it. So, Merry Christmas, sir. Have a good day. And it just, the people that I've seen truly come into it as a result of talk has been a result of genuine long form conversations over a period of time where they have come to me with questions and I've been able to satisfy those questions from a stand where I've been able to reciprocate what they were coming to me and not being on the offensive trying to conquer their theological worldview. I've never been successful, I don't think, conquering somebody theologically. Have you?
No. Even if you win an argument, you don't win the person. And so maybe we'll learn now that, and maybe people can learn from what we've done, that they just need to live in love and have an answer for the hope that is in them. Not have a conversation starter. It's like we want to have a conversation starter and ender, but we don't need it.
Yeah.
I think you're right about that.
Well, so I think it's from I don't know why I'm looking up here. There's really nothing up there.
I think that's the thinking side. Wait, was that your left? I think we think in this direction.
I'm staring
I think we
off.
lie in this direction.
okay,
So
I'm-
at least you're not looking at the lying angle.
Okay, so to the right is the lie, and to the left is
If you look up to the left is thinking. Now I'm going to get in your head for the rest of the interview.
Okay, yeah.
And it's not always the same. People are going to fact check me on that.
Yeah. I think like, every time I look over, and they're like, "See, he's lying."
No,
He's lying.
it was the lying angle, Luke. He's trying to prepare his next. Sorry, I threw you off.
What was I saying?
How could you remember after that?
I think we really do sometimes think that we're the ones affecting this in people's lives. And when I submitted my own heart to the reality that one man sows, one man waters, it's God that gives the increase. One man sows, one man reaps. It's God that gives the increase. That I'm not affecting this in people's hearts or their minds. I'm only doing my part at that point in time, and then it's my job to move on.
Well, if you have more to say about that, you can. But I'm wondering how you got to that conclusion.
Failure. I've come to my conclusions by making my own mistakes. I've been everything that I don't like. And it's helped me to have some it's helped me to calm down about the immediate visual success that I'm hoping for, and allow myself to just be okay with only doing a part in a point in time. You know, the scriptures talk a lot about farming and gardening, and I have a message that I have preached a couple times at our church called God is a Farmer. And it goes a different direction every single time. But part of the essence of that message is that farming takes a lot of time. And there's different steps along the way that are to be done in the right order. And if things are done out of order, then your crop is messed up. And we can quickly dump. You know, one of the things that I love about the Torah community is that we're getting into properly stewarding the land, and there's a big focus on that. And I think that I'm not a big tree hugger or a big environmentalist, but if the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and we're the stewards of the earth, we ought to be taking care of it, and we ought to be through our farming practices and whatnot, doing it in a way that honors the Lord and is perpetual in it. You know, if we want to talk about genetically modified seeds that don't reproduce after themselves, like that's not of God. And so if I take that approach to evangelism or trying to convert somebody to the Torah, going for that quick, immediate result has not been successful for me. And so what the Lord has given me, my mind works a certain way. I recognize patterns. I just recognize patterns. I mean, I recognize them visually. I recognize patterns when I read books or watch a movie, and I sometimes see the big picture. In some ways that's good, and sometimes that's not good. But in trying to get somebody to come to the Torah, I think we lose sight of the big picture, that it's the Father that's orchestrating all of this, and He's doing everything, and we're just either watering or we're just reaping something that somebody else had labored in along the way, and that the Father gave the increase, and we're just a truly ripe piece of food falls off the vine. It's ready when it's ripe. And the same thing goes for people who are born again or convert to the Torah. They're just ready. And we make mistakes when we lose sight of that and think that we're the ones affecting it. And it creates an urgency in us. And I think it's a fakeness in our message, and we become salespeople. And I think worldly people are more prudent, I think, sometimes, and not prudent's not the right word. They're more shrewd than we are, and they see right through it, I think. So that's where I've come to a lot of these conclusions for, where we are is I'm just not as big a hurry as I used to be. And it's taken a lot of pressure off my shoulders. And I don't have to be somebody that I'm not. I can just be a kid that grew up in Southern Ohio, and that's okay. And I don't have to pronounce certain words certain ways. I don't have to, I can use Jesus, and that's okay. I can say God, and that's okay. And maybe somebody listening to this might disagree with that, and that's fine. But the truth is, there's one name worldwide, and the mission of the kingdom is to disciple the nations. It's that all nations would come. And I don't think that the nations will lose their individual distinctions and cultural distinctions when they come into the kingdom, and everybody essentially become looking Jewish. I don't see that in the scriptures. Even in Zechariah, all of the nations have their own, even they have their own languages. And I don't think the different tribes had their own cultural distinctions. Within the 12 tribes, there were cultural distinctions. And they kept those things. And that was okay. And that's where I got into this and didn't know who I was anymore. And I carried with me insecurities from my past, identity insecurities. And now I'm, okay, am I a Christian? Am I not a Christian? And there was a time where I went through this phase of, I'm not even going to call myself a Christian anymore. And because that, associates itself with paganism and all of this and that. And I, at the time, I was really inside of myself, really proud of where I was and these individual stands I was taking and all of that, but I was completely ineffective in the world. I was not effective because I was completely disengaged from being able to connect with the average person at the checkout aisle. And I was just a walking caricature of somebody who didn't know who they were. And so I find it ironic that the Northern Kingdom has struggled with identity because they lost their identity. And all of us who come back and are saying, hey, we're grafted in, or we're a part of the house of Israel, Ephraim, the house of Joseph, whichever name we're going to use, still struggle with those very identity things that we don't know who we are. We bring those things in and haven't really dealt with them, I don't think, as a community. Do you?
Well, it seems like your story is common, so maybe not. I mean, it seems like we off camera, we talked about how when people come into this, they start just glomming on to all the Hebrew words they can, whether they are necessary or not. It's like they moving out of Mitzrayim, it's all this stuff. Strangely, every few words will just be Hebrew. But when you come into this, you're like, that makes sense because we lost the Hebrew roots of the faith. And so we're reigniting that, and many people are learning Hebrew, and so it's exciting and it's fun. And you said you're running straight for that, like down that road, 100 miles an hour, right? And so on one hand, you learn things from a Hebrew perspective that you didn't know, which I think is great. And on the other hand, you fetishize Hebrew everything and or fetishize the state of being Jewish. And those things I don't think are necessary, because Yah is not a respecter of person. He neither Greek nor Jew does he respect one more than the other. And I think that we sometimes, I think most people totally would agree with me there, but I think sometimes that line gets blurred in this movement. So yeah, I guess I do agree. It's a long way to say it.
I overcompensated because it was a foreign place and I didn't have the grounding well enough in myself from a personal standpoint. I think just a personal standpoint, not a spiritual thing, that I overcompensated by being out of a community that was normal or common, the Christian community, Sunday Christian community. Now I'm over in here. I had to overcompensate through knowledge and words and how I presented myself to prove to this group of people that I was right and I was smart, and hey, I'm over here and I'm doing this and I'm smarter than you. But the truth is, none of us are smarter than any of those people in the Sunday Christian community. We don't know any of the stuff that we know because we figured it out on our own. This was a spiritual blindness put upon our forefathers. How can we take any credit for anything that we know? Some of the smartest people who ever lived are in that Sunday Christian community, even now. And so, let's take Martin Luther, for example. Martin Luther has some sketchy, sketchy interactions with the Jewish community, right? To put that mildly. And it's easy to look back and say, well, all of these guys that came before us, I mean, they didn't know anything about the Torah. We need to cast off everything that they have done. But I would look at it from a completely different perspective, that the Father is restoring. To use a farming example, he's restoring the land, and he's doing it not in a hurry, because it doesn't happen quickly. Culture is not created overnight, and it's not established and made firm overnight. And so it's taken it's taken over 400 years to get to a place where we were ready to be able to receive it. Because if it wasn't for Martin Luther, we'd all be Catholics or dead. Right?
Yeah. And it reminds me of the Torah example of the fact that he says, I'm not going to drive out all the wild beasts in one day. It's going to be little by little as you're able to take the land over.
That's right.
It's the same principle.
That's right. And I've found that when I take ground that was taken too quickly, I give it up very, very easily. We're talking about, to continue to use these farming examples, we're talking about the difference between taking land and returning it to a natural farming symbiotic relationship with the animals and the land and the manure and the seed and the consistency year after year of managing your crops and improving what you have, taking your talents and increasing them, to use another example, versus coming in, plowing everything under, throwing genetically modified seeds into the ground, and then coming by, a month later and spraying toxic chemicals on the ground that kill all the weeds and and nowadays we have the pesticides built into the seeds and all of that stuff. But I've got farms around me that farm that way. And in the spring, when everything's growing up and growing green, there's not a thing growing in that field unless somebody comes by and artificially manipulates it. And this is the difference of what we're talking about. And I think that we've been in such a hurry that it's impacted our ability to build something that we can stand on. It's an unsure foundation. I've seen a lot, I've been involved in the Torah community since 2008. And I've seen a lot come and go in that time. And I've seen a lot of sand, foundations built on sand. And certain areas of my life built things on sand, only to have those implode. And this is how I've come now full circle to, I'm just not in as big a hurry anymore.
So can you talk about your experience? Maybe began with the Baptist church where you felt this, where you got that original idea of being in a hurry, and then how, really eschatologically, if we will, and can you talk about that, and then how that inspired you to get involved in things outside of the church?
Gosh, we're going down this road.
We can do that now. We can touch on other things if we want before, if you want.
No, I think this is a good place to go. I want to say a little bit more about, just from a testimony standpoint, we started a house church in our home, and we had a house church for around 8 years or so. And when we did, my kids were really young. I've got one of my sons here who's now 13, and he was born into this house church, right? I mean, your mom was in my living room when my wife was pregnant for him. So, there was a certain part of me, because of I grew up Baptist. Most of them believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, the imminent return of Christ. And just to I guess preface this, I use Jesus, I say Christ, and I do it now because I don't feel the need to say Yeshua unless I'm in a certain, if I'm around a Torah community, then I guess I'm trying to follow the example of Paul. When I'm around a Torah community, then okay, I'll use Torah terms and things like that. I'm not a big fan of sounding like a Brooklyn synagogue where every fourth word is Hebrew or Yiddish or whatever, and you get a lot of that. I just think it's unnecessary. It's performance. And so we had a house church, and I thought, because I carried that imminency into Torah, I brought a lot of those mindsets into Torah, and I've come to a place where I'm starting to re-examine a lot of those things in the exact same way that I did my Sunday Christian upbringing. I'm starting to look at them and say, okay, well, what things did I bring in here that ought not to be here? And one of them is just the way I perceive eschatology, because eschatology drives what I think is going to happen tomorrow, drives how I'm going to live today.
This is the part that I think is important.
That's the foundation that has caused us, and I'm going to include Sunday Christians in this community. And the reason I say that is we've talked about this off camera, we talked about this many a time. I maintain that the Sunday Christian community keeps as much Torah as the Torah community. Just the other half. I mean, how many Hebraic roots hospitals are out there? How many Hebraic roots homeless shelters are out there? Or food kitchens? But there's a whole lot of Sunday Christian ones, even Catholic ones. Now, we can argue about the effectiveness of the healthcare industry. I don't want to go down that road. But generally, from where they started, that's Torah. Right? I read a book by a guy named Glenn Scrivener. It's called The Air We Breathe. And the premise of the book is that we are like fish living in water who actually don't understand how Christianized our culture is. And a good portion of the book, he's talking about how society was in the first century. Pedophilia was a normal thing. It was commonly accepted. amongst the upper class. It was normal. Nobody had a problem with it. Slavery was normal. Nobody had a problem with it. Injustices were normal. From a justice system, the idea that every single person was equal and should receive the same amount of consideration in a legal system was a foreign thing for them, because there was a class-based system. And with my job, I've been to India, and that's still there today. It's a non-Christian culture. It's still there. They have servants walking around the office. It's a very odd thing to go and see that. And so I started examining all of our culture, and even like the social justice movement is standing upon a Christian foundation to argue for the justice that they think they want. Because as an atheist or a non-Christian arguing for justice, I mean, why? Why? If there's no higher authority that we all answer to, even our legal system and our government, why is anybody arguing for anything? It's only survival of the fittest and power rules and get what you want, right? So you can't argue for anything in our society without standing upon the Christian foundation that was here, brought over, by our forefathers. And so I really just started it gave me compassion for the Sunday church world that, wow, they've really been effective. As many bad things as we have going on in the United States, and I'm not disputing any of that, the reality of you and I being able to sit here in this scenario shows that the gospel given to a very small group of people in a very small geographic area of the world has been incredibly successful, to the point where Christian nations rule the world right now. And so I would argue that the gospel's been the advancement of the kingdom has been a lot more successful than we think it is. And we've looked at it from a standpoint of we're going to lose, and then Jesus is going to come back and bail us out. That's the essence of that message. But that's not what he said. He said, all power in heaven and earth has been given to me. He said, go into all the world, preach the gospel, baptizing them in my name, disciple the nations. The effectiveness of, and if we look at our feast days, the Feast of Tabernacles, which is an idiom of the Feast of Tabernacles, is the Feast of the Nations, is that the nations will come to the Torah. Even the end of the Feast of Tabernacles, we've got a celebration of the Torah, that all nations will come to the Torah. And I believe we have a mandate to do that and to bring that about. And I believe it's actually been very successful. And I believe the Sunday church, although they don't recognize it themselves, when you talk about law to them, they get a huge aversion. They're keeping a very large portion of the law. Okay, so they don't say Shabbat Shalom, and they're not honoring a Saturday Sabbath. Fine. Yeah, they're celebrating some pagan holidays. But fine, okay. But to a great degree, they're showing mercy. They're affecting biblical justice in the earth better than any other area of the world, right? As bad as it is here, there's still a whole lot of people trying to get here. And so all of this stuff just started piecing together for me. And I realized I have had a death fear-based mindset that I've positioned my whole life around. I'm waiting on everything to be really, really bad, and then Jesus to come and bail me out, versus getting busy about my Father's business and working the land and advancing the kingdom. Now, to give this, I guess, something to anchor to, I've not settled on this, and I don't want to put out my own personal beliefs on this, because I'm still working it out. The idea of the millennium, whether it's a premillennial, post-millennial, amillennial, those things. But I don't believe that we've been given permission as a community and as individuals to sit back and wait on him to bury our talents in the ground and wait on the master to show up. And I see so much of that.
Well, no matter the eschatology, that is a sound biblical principle, because that is the exact, that's a parable that Yeshua told us. And he did that bad servant maybe he's even called bad servant or unproductive servant or something. His is taken from him.
Unfaithful.
So we know that is wrong.
That's right.
And so we know that we must occupy and conquer and expand, I think, until he returns. So
Yes. And so, okay, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and all they that dwell therein. And that includes every system. And this is where we've, to a certain degree, isolated ourselves and removed ourselves from the culture. And as a result, culture's being created for us and then dumped upon us. And our forefathers did not believe that way. In fact, the forefathers that gave us, the Christian forefathers that gave us the system that we're benefiting from as Torah believers, were all post-mill. All of them. The Puritans were post-mill. They all believed that they would, to connect it with Revelation, that the gospel would be successful. What Yeshua told us to do, we would actually accomplish. The bride would make herself ready, and then he would return. Okay? And I don't want to shipwreck anybody's idea, so I don't want to go down a theological argument in that area. But you can't argue with what they did in the world. The 1600s, 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s Christians built us a Christian world that we have let go because of, in my opinion, primarily a pre-tribulation rapture eschatology. Because we are waiting on him to show up at any minute and not doing anything. That's long term. Now we may have a stockpile of food in our basement, and we may have our guns and our bullets, and I'm not against that. I mean, I've got that myself. But I'm also looking at my 13-year-old and saying, well, when I first got into this, I didn't expect him to be 13. And here we are. His voice is changing. He's becoming a man, and I'm getting gray in my beard, and perhaps I saw things wrong. And I don't want to approach my life now for the next 20 years and not do anything and hand him a sinking ship that he's now got to fight the battles that I was afraid or refused to fight in my culture at large. Now that's whether I'm a Sunday Christian or a Torah observant Christian. Because here's why. The Lord is the authority in the earth, right? And we are his hands and his feet and his body in the earth, right? And so if we get involved in these things, how can we not be successful? Why have we gotten to the point where we are accepting the fact that our job down here is to lose until Jesus comes back? That's not scriptural. That is a fear-based, debt-based mindset, burying my talents into the ground.
He says he'll bless everything we put our hand to.
That's right.
Do. Why would that only be limited to career and not also extend to politics?
Why would he tell us to do something that he didn't think we could accomplish? So I maintain that we are around a lot of homeschool people. You homeschool your kids, right? But the problem is the vast majority of the next generation of people who are going to be making decisions for you and I when we're old men are in the public school systems right now. So I have a vested interest for my children and my grandchildren on what's going on there. And I think I can change things and win locally because I have the Spirit of God in me if I'm willing to make myself available to him. Daniel worked in the government. Nehemiah worked in the government. And they were responsible for some very, very important things that impacted all of the children of God and the ones scattered abroad. If it wasn't for Nehemiah, we don't get the initial mandate to go back and restore and rebuild Jerusalem. And he was the king's cupbearer, a pagan king's cupbearer. So we could look at that from the outside at the time. If we look at it now through our lens that we see, and we're like, okay, well, that person works for a godless president right now. Like I am convinced that somewhere in there, in that monstrosity that's over there, there are some Nehemiahs and some Daniels in there that are serving the Lord. And we ought to be training up more of them to do that. And we ought to be learning how to operate the Torah as a legal system, because at some point, that's what's going to be operating in our community. Now, how do we get from here to there? It's going to take some time. I believe every other group out there is telling society that they have to reshape according to their wishes and desires. But we're the only ones with an actual mandate from the supreme authority in the universe, and with that spiritual authority to bring that to pass. And we can be incredibly effective. That's why they're so afraid of us being involved. That's why I believe we've been conditioned as a body to not be involved. We got to keep religion out of politics. That's the most ridiculous thing in the whole world. Half of the Torah is about politics. Maybe not half. I mean, a good portion of it, probably a third of the Torah, is about how the king behaves himself, right? And the king was not allowed to do the priest's job. But the priests were holding the king accountable. The priests and the prophets. So why wouldn't we be doing that in our society? Why wouldn't we be? We have a mandate and we have the authority. We not only do we have permission, we have a commission to do it. And so if you get involved and you're generally marching in the right direction for the Lord, it's going to be successful. It is. And we can't determine our success based on what we see 10 minutes from now. We're going to play the long game. We'll see how effective or ineffective we were 1,000 years from now when we're in the kingdom and the Lord shows us. But we've got a job to do.
So the silent majority should no longer be silent. And in fact, if they remain silent, they won't be the majority anymore.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the silent majority is losing their children.
How did you come to this realization? Like, was it when he's getting older and you're watching him grow? Did anything else, like personal story wise, coincide with this?
Yes. And this connects with my testimony. We had a house church, and I was at a place where I was wrestling with my desire to grow a ministry, ambition. And I started to see it in my heart. And my kids were starting to get a little bit older, and it was getting harder we have the church in our home, and my heart started to be for my children. Okay. So Malachi 4, where the hearts of the fathers are turned to the children and the hearts of the children are turned to the fathers. And I started to see that happen in myself, and that's Torah, right? Remember the law of Malachi 4. Remember the law of Moses, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. Behold, I'll send you Elijah the prophet, and he shall turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the father. And my heart started to be turned towards my children and not towards a ministry. And I was wrestling with this desire for myself. And what I now look back on and didn't recognize at the time was actually the Torah working in my heart. That spirit of Elijah turning my heart to my children, and it was breaking down something that I wanted for myself and turning towards them. And the essence, what the Father was saying was, you need to pump the brakes and focus on these guys. This is, at this point in time, what I want you doing. Other stuff will go, will be down the road. So I'm a musician. We play worship. We had played worship at Carmel Christian Center, which is where I attend now and get to minister to with Pastor David and Pastor Tom, and it's been fantastic being there. We went and we did a worship session they connect the dots with Don and Stacy had put this thing together, and we were the worship, and it was all the different house churches in the area. And people with different businesses and things, the Torah community coming together. And while I was there, that was the time where my heart was being pulled away from personal ambition and ministry towards my children. And the Lord said, it's time to stop. And so we talked to the people in our church. We said, hey, this is what we're going to do. I don't know what the future holds, but this I know. And I was really I was hurt and angry at the Lord at the time, because I enjoy this. But you notice I keep saying it, I, all of this stuff, and but I relented and submitted to the Lord. And then a few months later, he said, I want you to go back to this church. There are men there that I want to help you. And I'm sending you there to help them. They're going to help you and you're going to help them. And we've been there now a little over 5 years. And they allow me to preach from time to time, which is great. I get to scratch that itch. It's something I thoroughly enjoy doing. And when we showed up, Pastor Tom starts prophesying to Sam and I exactly what I had told her. Hey, the Lord told me this. He said we need to go back there. I don't know why. I just know we need to go there. Tom walks up the very first service that we're there and prophesies exactly what I told Sam, and then prophesies to her some things that she was going through in her heart, and this is what the Lord is telling you. And immediately we knew, okay, we were right in the right place. And the essence of that was this: man, the Lord is not in nearly as big a hurry as I am. And every time I get in a hurry, I do something that doesn't reproduce after itself. And I think that's one of the essence of the Torah. For somebody who's new in the Torah, like this is something that I would tell people from time to time. This is a really good barometer on whether or not it's Torah. Can it reproduce after itself? Because the essence of Torah is life. It gives life. Does it bring life or doesn't it? If it's just an immediate thing and it doesn't continue on, then I think it was something that was off base and not planted with the proper roots and longevity. Because when the Lord does something, it's perpetual and ongoing. And it reproduces after itself, after its own kind. It takes us back to Genesis, right? It's one of the very foundations of the realm that we live in. That which is of God will reproduce after itself. So I started recognizing this and realizing, and then I just started looking at the scriptures of a lot of these eschatology scriptures that I saw from an immediate standpoint. We were talking about this earlier, Ezekiel 37, which is about the reunification of the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And when you get to the end of Ezekiel 37, well, then it goes to Ezekiel 38, and it says after many years, after those that have been regathered, that's when the Gog and Magog war will happen. And I've heard my whole life, at any moment, the Gog and Magog war could happen, and Russia could come down and bomb Israel, and the Lord's going to intervene, but the rapture will happen right before that. And I think that just that whole thing was clouding how I saw those scriptures. And I've come to the conclusion, I believe that the house of Israel and the house of Judah have to come back together. And I believe that the house of Israel has got to be able to come and face the house of Judah, the rabbis, and sit down and talk through the Torah constructively and with authority, so that we don't end up with rabbinic Judaism. Because rabbinic Judaism is a false religion. And if we're not trained in the Torah and properly grounded, it's very easy for us to go down that road, and next thing you know, we're changing everything about ourselves. And this is what I've seen a lot. And I did this. I was that person. But it didn't produce life. It only produced more of the need to consume the drug of the next new thing, the next new bit of knowledge, the next new calendar interpretation, the next new thing. And if you strip all of that away, what is the scriptures at their essence? It teaches individuals how to live together properly. Love God, love your neighbor. And where that's played out is at the very basic building block of society, which is the family. And I see so much, I saw so much, and I was, and this is where the Lord hit me right in my desire to grow a ministry. And we were at a point where it was like, we had, 40, 50 people in a small little living room this size every Sabbath. And, we were rolling, and we were looking to buy a building and all of this and that. And the Lord said, no, I want you to focus on your family. Maybe Dr. James Dobson had it figured out. But because isn't that the essence? And it was, my ego had to be crushed so that I could see this, because I was looking at the world from the wrong perspective. Because I was living in a fear-based mindset, and I'm not against preparedness. I want to be very clear about that. I love guns just as much as the next person. Okay. And I think it's very prudent to be prepared for certain situations. But the reality is, you can't carry enough food to go through the children of Israel couldn't carry enough food to go through the wilderness for 40 years to get to the promised land. Right? The whole message of the wandering in the wilderness was that Yah provides water, bitter waters, manna, food, clothing. Their shoes didn't wear out. Their clothes didn't wear out. The whole message is, I provide for you. And then Yeshua tells us, stop thinking like a Gentile, a non-family member of the household of the kingdom of heaven. Stop worrying about what you wear, what you eat, what you drink. That's the message of the wilderness. I've already demonstrated to you that I will provide for those things. You need to stop worrying about yourself and start doing something that sets up the next generation to then take it a step further and a step further. That's the conclusion that I've come to.
So let me see if I can track this through your story and tell me where I'm wrong and so on. So you came into the Torah, you were 100% for the whole Hebrew roots thing, where, and as you went down that path, you probably witnessed some people going too far on that path into Judaism. And eventually you realized that was not a good thing to do.
I was close to going down that road. And you see a lot of people walk away from the Messiah as a result of it.
And so you realize that's bad fruit.
Yes.
And so it sounds like then you came to this crisis of life and faith and everything, and you decided, hey, until we can, from a Christian worldview, with Christ, Jesus, Yeshua, as our Messiah and as the author of our religion and our salvation, go toe-to-toe with the rabbinic Jewish rabbis over the Torah and be able to win them over and become the one new man, we don't even need to consider or think about eschatology from that after that, because that hasn't happened. We need to get that sorted out. Is that sort of partly
the two sticks have to become one, and we're not even remotely close to that.
But we're closer than we were 10 years ago.
We are. Right. We're very and praise the Lord for that. And the underlying message of what I'm saying is that I'm looking to the right, so people are going to think I'm lying.
He's lying.
I got to turn to the left. The underlying message in that.
I don't remember which one's lying. Anyway, go on. Sorry.
Here's the underlying message. And this is what I've come to with all of that. If I think about the provisions, right? The Father is going to take care of his business. My job is to do my job. My job is not to do his job. And he is not in as big a hurry as we all thought he was.
So in concluding that, in your life, you concluded you had more time, if you will.
Yes.
Thus, it made you look around at the state of affairs of the nation in which we live, which was formed as a Christian nation at its inception, and likely looking at your son and children and thinking, I don't want them to have to fight the battles that I didn't fight.
Absolutely. Because I was afraid that the Antichrist was going to show up, or that the government was going to turn against me, and we were going to run around and have to worry about getting beheaded or whatever. Because here's the reality. If that's going to happen, it's going to happen anyway, regardless of whether I'm hiding in my basement or whether I'm out there doing something. Do we honestly think that they don't know who we all are? Take schooling, for example. So if we're not affecting governmental policy in the world that we're living in, do we honestly think that we're going to be allowed to be continuing to homeschool if we want to for the next 30 to 40 years if things continue going the way they're going? You see, the battle is coming whether we fight it, we go to fight it here, or whether it shows up on my doorstep. So I may as well get out there and actually do something now before it shows up on my doorstep while I've been hiding from it and isolating myself. Right? It's coming whether it's coming. It's coming to a head. We're not in a place in our society where we can continue on in the way that we're going. Right? It's an either or situation.
So you decided to run towards the fight.
Run towards the fight and get involved. And that has, to use the farming example, I'm looking at where we are right now and we've given a lot away. And so I have to be prudent about, prudent is not the right word. I have to be shrewd about how I conduct my battle plan. the scriptures tell us that if you're going to go fight a battle, you need to survey the situation before you run off to fight. And I look at the situation and say, okay, if I want to get over here, I've got to start here. So I'm going to start here. And what does that mean practically? That means locally getting involved in my local schools, whether I'm homeschool or whether I'm not. And maybe this takes us down the road of being active if you want to talk about that. So when COVID happened, we had a mandate come down to our school where all the kids had a mask, and my kids were in the public schools. I decided my kids are not wearing a mask, period. So I wrote a letter to the school and I said, my children are not going to wear a mask. They were okay with it. I had to run in with a bus driver, but they said, okay. And there was that was like the catalyst where it was a really interesting time, because I think we all found out a lot about ourselves. We found out who we would be. We always wonder, what would I have done in Nazi Germany? A lot of, I don't know, we all, but my wife and I have talked about what would we have done?
Well, the basic, not to distract, but the basic question of men,
yeah,
the male sex,
yes,
is, would I run in war? I
Yes.
mean, do I have courage
Yes.
when it comes down to, when death is on the line?
Yes.
Will I run towards it?
Yes.
And yeah, that's for me,
all
for my
quiet
whole
on
life.
the Western Front, right?
Yes,
I mean,
that's- So that kind of, it's
I think we
edging
all
on
found
that.
out. I think we all found out. I think it was a good test run. Maybe it didn't play out to its fullness, but we got a taste of what I would do in an extreme totalitarian situation. Okay? And just for the record, I don't believe that I think maybe people have gathered it by now, but I don't believe that the pre-tribulation rapture is scriptural. Okay? So at minimum, I think if there is a 7-year tribulation that we would go through it. Okay? So there's lots of beliefs about what that will be like. That was a really good trial run if we end up in that situation of how we will conduct ourselves. In fact, if there's a mark of the beast that's an actual thing that we all have to choose, and I would make the argument, and especially for the Torah community, the mark of the beast, in my opinion, is a perfect counterfeit of the Shema. Write my commandments upon your hand, what you do, and let them be frontlets between your eyes, what you think, who you are. It's who I am and what I do. That's the Shema, right? Love God, love your neighbor. How do I love my neighbor? Keeping God's commandments. How do I love God? Keeping God's commandments. Love God, love your neighbor. Okay? So where does the mark of the beast come from? Or where does the mark of the beast go? Right? And what is the core tenet of the mark of the beast? Provision. Which goes back to where we started. Provision is the core tenet of the mark of the beast. Without it, you can't buy or sell. So you can't eat. So the question is the same thing that the children of Israel had when they came out of Egypt and went into the wilderness. Will Yah provide? Correct? So the COVID situation was a very good trial run on what I will do and how I will respond if I'm put in a situation where I can't buy or sell unless I have to take this thing. How will I respond to that? And that might be uncomfortable for people to hear, but that's the reality of the situation. We all found out, for the most part, how we would respond. And if that's the way the mark of the beast plays out, we all found out how we would have responded at that point in time. Now, hope to God, if we responded in a way where it didn't go well for us, that that Yah gives us the opportunity to repent of that, like he did to Peter, and he will in his mercy and his grace. And for those of you who you're ashamed of how you conduct yourself, there's mercy there. And Peter's the perfect example. He denied the Lord 3 times, and the Lord came back and said, tell me you love me 3 times, and feed my sheep. Okay. But provision is the core thing of the mark of the beast. So
to before you move on,
okay,
put a fine point on it, just so no one can skip over this and forget about what you said.
Okay.
You're saying we went through a trial run of what could be a similar situation of the mark of the beast, and many of us failed. And we rather than trusting in Yah's provision, we went along with the provision forced upon us. And yes, that's sad. And yes, it's embarrassing. And yes, we need to ask for forgiveness. But yes, he is the God of power and strength, and he will help us next time. So maybe this was a grateful thing to have happened.
Yes. And if we did, if we
That's hard, bro.
It's hard.
That's a hard word.
It's a hard
Eric.
word. Yeah.
But you're right. You're right. I mean, and non-believers are saying the same thing. Andrew Tate is saying the same thing. He's like, anyone who went along with all this stuff needs to publicly apologize and blah, blah. He's going at it like they need to apologize thing, but not like you need to learn from this sort of thing. And anyway, not to always bring up Andrew Tate in every interview.
Is it not a shameful thing that a man like Andrew Tate is winning the minds of the men right now through just practicality? And we're arguing for the most part over stuff that the average guy over here who's being told he's horrible and toxic and marginalized in society, and there's no place for you, and you need to step aside, which is completely flipping upside down the design for Yah's design for society, which is patriarchy, godly patriarchy, which is a protective covering for the whole community.
Benevolent king.
Yes. That Andrew Tate is coming in and saying things that are true in a lot of cases, and that are practical, and that are like the problem that we've done in the Torah is we've made it religious. It's practical. It's the structure of how society should operate. It's not a religion. And we've separated these things still.
We've made it a denomination.
We've made it a denomination.
Instead of just adding it to our tool bag. Because what the Torah really is a revelation of the constancy of sovereign morality found in the Bible.
Yes.
And that's the exact same thing that Andrew Tate went to get from Islam.
Yes.
And that's the exact same thing that anyone that sees the strength of Islam as being a moral code that's immovable.
Yes.
That's what we were missing in Christianity, and the Torah solves that.
Yes.
Now let's move forward.
And we've missed it again. And you know why we did? Because Ephraim has idolatry in his blood. We've committed the same sins our forefathers did by making a religion about it and getting caught up in what it looks like, not how it operates. So the first thing we do is we start changing everything about ourselves. How we speak and the words we pronounce. And I had long flowing tzitzit like everybody else. And I'm not against that. I'm just saying those are not the prime things. I mean, Yeshua told the Pharisees, hey, you great, you're tithing mint and cumin and yet you've forgotten the weightier measures of the law. And I think we're at risk of doing the same thing. And I was that person, Luke. And that's what, how did I get to where I was? It's because he continues to show me my own heart. That when I get down that road, he says, hey, here's a reflection of who you are. The Torah is a reflection of who you are. Here's who you are right now. And that's not life-giving where I was. And so I'm either creating culture around me, and I believe we have the Spirit of the living God living inside of us. How can we accept the fact that we need to continually stand back and watch everything fall apart when that's not what he told us to do? He said, go therefore. The examples that he gave us in the parables of the talents is a perfect example of the unfaithful servant who buried his talent in the ground because he knew his Lord was a harsh man. We got to be growing the kingdom. And the Torah is a lot more practical than I think we've recognized it. Because why? We didn't know anything, and so we ran to Rabbinic Judaism to try to understand it. And there's a lot of really good stuff in understanding, but we've got to understand that Rabbinic Judaism is a false religion. As hard as that sounds, it's the reality. And they are some of the biggest opponents of the real kingdom that are out there. And that's not an anti-Jewish thing. I don't have a problem with that. But we're not Jewish to a large degree. The majority of us are not. And so we don't need to become that. The Torah was prior to Judah, right? Wasn't Abraham prior to Judah? And this is the same thing. Like, I've had this conversation with some Jewish acquaintances. I say, well, who's the first Jew? Well, Abraham was. No, he wasn't. Judah was the first Jew. Well, you got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah. And Rabbinic Judaism showed up, has its roots back to Babylon, right? It's a temple-based, non-sacrificial system. And so the foundation of it is wrong. So I guess what I'm saying is Sunday Christians have a lot more right than they think they do. And they have a lot more right than we thought that they did whenever we all first came out of Sunday Christianity. And they're keeping over half the Torah. I mean, I would argue they're keeping 60% or more of the Torah, right? So, and they've given us this society, this Christian society that we live in.
Because the blessings of the Torah are real.
They are real.
If they weren't keeping any of the Torah, then we wouldn't see any blessings surrounding Christian-based societies.
Absolutely. And so
we're living in the blessings of that evidence.
We're living in a Torah society.
Partially, yeah. Yeah,
the fact
largely.
Yeah. I would say more Torah than not.
Yeah.
And
thank goodness. I mean, we always. I think most people out there.
Message.
Yes, most people out there will be like, man, I thank Yah for the blessing of being born in this country.
Oh my goodness!
And that's because of all of this stuff.
Yes.
So, all right, another recap, just to make sure. I mean, I know people are tracking it all, but I want to make sure I am and keep digesting this for people. You're saying that what you noticed in the Torah movement is that there was a tendency to fetishize and almost idolize, create idols out of some Jewish things and or just Hebrew itself, the language,
yes.
and all the differentiations between us and our Christian brother,
right?
I.e. long zeds, all this stuff, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Not that any of that is bad, because those are things that we were missing and we added to ourselves.
It's not bad, but if my family's in shambles while I have all of that stuff right, what good have I really accomplished? Am I actually keeping Torah? Because the Torah starts with a husband and a wife in a garden with a couple of kids. So if I'm not getting that right, I would argue I'm not keeping Torah. That's a hard message.
Well, part of the requirement to be at least an elder is that you have to be of good repute, I believe. And if you don't care for your family, you're worse than an infidel. So there's a bunch of scripture to go along with what you said.
Yeah. And so I have a responsibility. The Bible says, the Proverbs say that the righteous man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, right? That's not just monetary. It is spiritual as well. But it is also leaving his realm better than where he found it. So let's go back to the garden. He placed Adam in a garden and he said, tend and keep it. And I would argue that all of the children of Adam have the same mandate. Wherever we find ourselves, we have a mandate to make it better. And that includes society, culture, politics, school systems, being involved. Yes, it's not perfect, but we're not going to get from here to there by coming in and demanding it. It's a process of restoration. Okay?
And we're definitely not going to get there if we don't do anything.
If we don't get involved. And so, look, lots of examples. The Lord is not he sent the Savior of the world. He became a human being. He sent the Savior of the world as a baby. He was not in a hurry. And that was 2,000 years ago. Our perspective on how I am expected to conduct my life right now has got to be widened from a camera view. And I have to live as if I'm going to have great-great-grandchildren. Because there's been a lot of people who have, my parents, I've had this conversation many times with them. They've lived their whole lives thinking Jesus was going to come back at any minute. And they're in their 70s now.
This idea has driven people away from many denominations, including Torah ones. I mean, that I know of. Yeah. And this perspective is actively, in real time, allowing children to be unprepared for life and to have a pessimistic view of the world and not go out and find a mate. That's like what this comes down to also. Not go out and learn, go to college, go to school, or just start a business or anything, like be involved.
Let's take that example. I've got 5 children. I've had people in the Torah community, even family members, uncomfortable with the latest announcement of a pregnancy. Now, my wife's not pregnant right now, but with the latest announcement of our last child, our 5th child. Wow, you sure you want to bring another kid into the world? Like, things are getting bad. One of the very first commandments we were given was to be fruitful and multiply. Who is the one who creates life in the womb? Is it me? It's certainly not. It's not my wife. The Father puts a life in my wife's womb. That is not my decision. Right? I don't want to go down that road, but the getting back to, it all comes back to provision, right? Is God going to take care of me or not? Is God going to take care of me or not? If I put myself out there, is God going to take care of me or not? If I go out and fight this battle, is God going to take care of me or not? He's going to take, and the conclusion I've come to is that he never calls me into a battle that he hasn't already won. Number one. And the scriptures actually mean what they say they mean. So we find ourselves in COVID, and I decide I'm not going to do this. My children are not going to do this. they're not going to wear a mask at school, period. Okay. And I find out there's other parents that are kind of doing the same thing. So there's like 100 and some parents that all somehow start getting connected. And I believe the Father was doing this in our school system. There was like 130 and it's since then really dropped off. But we were all in a group chat, in a Signal chat, and we started getting organized. And thank God for these mama bears who are out there. I mean, moms are after it. You start messing with a mom's child, and they are active, and we've got some amazing women in our school system who are just workers. But at the time, our school board was 4-1 liberal versus conservative, one conservative person, 4-1. And we started getting organized, and we got some good candidates, and we knocked on every single door in the district. Now we're in a large school district up in the surrounding Columbus area. We live in Delaware County, which is one of those key counties in election races that show up a lot of times on the news, where they're basically trying to gauge the country off of Delaware County because it's a good cross section. It's almost split down the middle of conservative and liberal. Our community was about 60-40, and we were able to flip the school board, and we flipped it from 4-1 to 3 conservative, 2 liberal. Now, at the time, I had found myself at a watch party with our 3 candidates, and when it was announced, our state senator called and said, "Hey, you guys have won. We won." It was like 63. They won 63% of the vote. I mean, it was overwhelmingly, and we made it very direct. We called it like it was. These 3 are left-leaning. These 3 are conservative people. We made it very partisan. When school, a lot of people would say, "Hey, school board races are not supposed to be a party," and they're absolutely partisan. Okay, and I'm not saying, someone might say 2 wings of the same bird, but hey, one party's openly at their convention offering vasectomies and abortions at their convention. Okay, now wasn't super happy with how the Republicans conducted themselves. And I know a lot of people aren't happy with Trump, but if it wasn't for Trump, we wouldn't have had Roe v. Wade overturned. So we have to be able to pan the picture back a little bit and say, hey, not everything is exactly like I want to be. And I'm not going to elect Jesus Christ as president right now. And so we have to take the best of what we got and move it forward and continue improving it and refining it. Does that make sense? And that's where we're at. So we flipped it, and I had the privilege. I actually got to pray over our 3 school board members and dedicate them as school board members to the Lord, working within the school system the night that they were elected. And since that time, we've been able to take another seat. It's now 4-1. There's been a lot of controversy. We've been on the news, everything else. But we've been, and I'm not even out there. I've spoken at a couple meetings and whatnot, but I've just taken the gifts and the talents that I have, which is primarily just praying for them, offering assistance and guidance and advice. And I've helped some people with some local editing of like some YouTube things that they're doing locally and that kind of thing. But the core message is this: all of us have the talents and abilities that God has given to us. And he's given to us, one of the things that we are expected to be is a mobile moving tabernacle. And so we affect the world around us in a positive way, bringing life wherever we go. And so every single person listening to this has a talent and a gift and ability that they could be using to further advance the kingdom in their local community, and they ought to put those things to use. And so it wasn't just me. It was, the whole group is predominantly Christian people, and we've been able to affect our local school and remove some bad things from the school that shouldn't be there. And there's some moms that are constantly going through books and things like that, that are in the schools, and they're, notifying the people, and we've gotten stuff removed, and just people are on guard and active. And someone might say, well, yeah, but why don't you pull your kids out of school? And that's fine if you want to do that, but you still have to fight the battle.
Can we talk a little bit in more detail about what the fallout was of flipping the school board? Like, because some people may be watching this and say, well, I don't see, really, it's not that obvious to me that the electing the conservative school board members was any better than the left-leaning school board members. And so can you tell us some of the details of changes that you were able to put in place, or they were able to put in place,
Yes.
Or, yeah.
So I would say that the need is that the vast majority of your future community members are in that building on a daily basis. Also, that school system, even though we've been lied to and told that it's unconstitutional even though we've had Supreme Court cases that say we are a Christian nation in their decisions, we've got this myth of the separation of church and state, although it was to keep the government out of our churches rather than keeping the church, the body of Messiah, out of the government, which is another big lie that we've been allowed to take root in our lives. Those kids are the next generation of people who are going to be voting. And so if we're not there, that's where the battle is. Hitler saw that. That's where the battle is. So what we've been able to do, for example, we had a clarifying of the flag policy. And this might seem like a minor thing, okay? But what they did was they standardized the flags that were allowed to be displayed in the school. So we don't end up with a whole bunch of different LGBT trans, flags and communist flags and all of these things that are creating massive amounts of division in our society. There were books that were being read in certain classes that were more or less pornographic, that are being read to high schoolers and even middle schoolers and things like that. They were being assigned these books that were obscene. We've been able to get a lot of those removed. In fact, we got a policy put in place where now it's being just communicated out what the curriculum acts. We have access to actually seeing the curriculum. The sex education that's taught to middle schoolers is that has been improved, and there's a lot of opt-in situations versus opt-out. Okay, so they're communicating to parents, this is what we're offering, but you have to opt into those things. So they flip these things around, and although those might seem like little things, incrementally, it's creating awareness within the community, because the vast majority of people, whether we want to, the media has led us all to believe that we're all crazy and there's only 15 or 16 of us that don't like all of this stuff that's happening. And that is just simply not true. The vast majority of people are looking at this whole situation and saying, I don't like this. I just don't know what to do about it. And the answer is find a way to get involved locally. Because the only thing I can do to affect anything at the national level, which is very minimal, is a vote. And that's questionable anyway. But I can get involved and volunteer in my school. So we've gotten LifeWise. Are you familiar with LifeWise? LifeWise and this might be the most important thing that we talk about today. Hopefully somebody will hear this. LifeWise is an organization that partners with local churches that creates transportation. They come and pick kids up at the school. They take them out for an actual class period and teach them Bible at a local church and then bus them back to, so they partner with local churches. Kids are getting Bible training. Now, these are a lot of these kids are just normal school kids who wouldn't have access to getting any kind of scriptural teaching at all. And it's offered now as a service to the community, and they get credit for it. And so we've gotten LifeWise into our school. And there was a little bit of, there was a battle there that, I mean, I think I've told you the story, and I don't want to go into that because but it was a pretty wild thing where we knew the Lord was saying, hey, this is what is going to happen. So we've gotten that into the school. And so little by little, we're advancing the kingdom within a local school district. Now, is the progress like this? No, but that's never, no progress is ever like that. I mean, David was a man after God's own heart, and his kingdom was a little bit rocky at times, okay? But generally, we're moving in the right direction. Up and down, but generally in the right direction if we're involved. Our Lord is the authority of the earth. All power and authority has been given to him in heaven and earth. We're here. We have a mandate to assert his dominion here. That's what I maintain. And I think to throw this out there, I think one of the best groups out there is a Sunday Christian church, is the Canon Press group, Doug Wilson and their group in Moscow, Idaho. They've taken over basically almost an entire college town, and and they've got they've got a press, Canon Press, where they're putting out audiobooks and lots of material. They're putting out YouTube videos and affecting, and they're talking about politics. I mean, we've got to be talking about that because it's society, and all of society and all of politics and everything still submits to the Lord. So everywhere submits to the Lord. The principal of my school is going to answer to the Lord for how they conduct themselves. The school board members are going to answer to the Lord for how they conduct themselves. The judges are going to answer to the Lord for how they conduct themselves. And we have got to get back to the place where everybody actually believes that. And we lost sight of that because we've been told that that either Jesus is going to come back next week or there's a separation of church and state. And that has seeded a whole generation. And in doing so, we've given up so much ground.
And so it seems like the answer is get involved, live as if we are immortals in mortal bodies.
Yes. Yes. Live as if I'm going to stand before the Lord and perhaps my future descendants, and answer to them for what I did or didn't do in the time period that I was responsible for the things that the Lord has given me stewardship over. So, and we've had events. We had an event called Protecting Family, Faith, and Freedom. I think it was I partnered with a local Sunday church. I had found out about this lady, She Van Fleet, who I've since become friends with, and whom you have interviewed, and she survived the communist Cultural Revolution, and she's written a book and told her story, and she's here in America, and she's looking at all of the things that she witnessed when she was his age occurring again here, and she's speaking out against it. and she's, pretty prominent. Tucker Carlson interviewed her, and which puts you in pretty good company, by the way. And we got to get Tucker on here. I mean, Tucker Carlson now is talking about things of God, and he's saying, I think the only thing that can save our society is Christianity. And she isn't a Christian. She thinks the same thing. She's told me that. And she's not a Christian. She said, in Christianity is the only thing that can stop what is happening in our culture, and in a lot of cases, we're not involved.
So then what's your advice for the guy who hasn't been voting for the last several years, does think it's two wings of the same bird, and who has been like, what's the point? If voting mattered, they wouldn't let us do it, as Mark Twain said.
Yeah. I mean,
which may have been tongue in cheek, but
that way myself.
And not just about voting, but you know what I mean. About getting involved in the local thing.
I felt that way myself. But voting, I think, is more than notching a piece of paper or pressing a button on a machine. It's a choice that we are assenting to, which is a dangerous road for me to open up, because somebody could say, well, yeah, I mean, look what, Trump's not pro-life. Hey, I get it. But he did nominate Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe v. Wade. It's a step in the right direction. So we have to be smart enough to recognize that it's not going to happen overnight. You don't build a kingdom overnight. So if we think about the parables that Yeshua told about, like, let's take the parables of the leaven in the loaves, okay? I would argue that that's more about time than anything else. The time that it takes. It's the leaven, because we're Torah observant, we think leaven bad, leaven sin, Passover, remove it, right? I believe it was a practical example that people could understand. And that's where I think we get lost sight of sometimes when we see things in the scriptures, but it takes a while for leaven to work its way through the loaf. And he said the kingdom is like leaven. It takes a while before the whole loaf is leavened. And what I believe he was given an example of is the kingdom is going to take time. The kingdom is like a mustard seed. It's the smallest of the seeds, but when it's fully grown, well, how long does a tree take? A long time. So I believe it was more about shaping their perspective of how quickly things were going to happen. And when my perspective is shaped in that way, it will change how I act. If I believe with certainty that I'm going to see his children one day, I'm going to change some things about how I do today. I'm not going to empty out my savings and, buy a bunch of survival gear. I'm probably going to try to grow an inheritance to pass on to them. And that's the same. I'm speaking in parable now when it comes to kingdom. And so for the person who says, hey, don't, it's worthless. Well, my choice, my desires have weight with the Father. He cares about what it is that I desire and what my choices are. And so I'm casting a choice to go in one direction or the other. And so it's a practical thing and not a religious observance. It's a practical thing that connects to kingdom building, that isn't a religious sacrament, to use a really bad term, that sanctifies us. It's a step in the right direction. So I believe we should vote. It's the system that we're in. And we at least locally, at minimum, vote locally. Okay, if you don't want to vote nationally, that's fine. But vote at the state level. Because all of getting back to the COVID example, all of the things that happened happened at a state level that impacted all of us. And a lot of them happened at a local level. So it's sitting on the sidelines. You're sitting on the sidelines. People might disagree, but that's how I see it.
I missed the opportunity to ask an obvious question, which some may have. Why wouldn't you let the kids wear a mask?
I believed it was a big lie. I mean, if you can smell fragrances through a mask, it's probably not protecting you from a microscopic virus. But the other thing was, it was just a tyrannical move that I wasn't willing to go along with. So maybe it was that Puritan mindset, like where they thought that, what was it? Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. I don't know if I thought it was tyranny and I didn't want to go along with it. I guess that was the simplest thing. Take a stand on something. Get involved in something. The littlest catalyst is a step in the right direction. And at the end of the day, none of us are doing any of this. It's all the Father. He's just looking for us to be willing, right? And he said, if you be willing and obedient, you'll eat of the good of the land. And that includes where we live here. It's not just that land over there. And so, you take, what is the best thing that you could do right now? The best thing that you can do right now is to raise your children. Have dinner with them. Talk to them. Love them. Strengthen them. Have them prepared to go out into the world, to face the world, and to know that it's not going to be easy or perfect, but they can actually win. If they're advancing the kingdom with the Lord, they can actually be successful. That, like for instance, John and Charles Wesley literally reshaped the world, helped reshape the world. Two brothers. Well, they both had a mom, and they both had a grandma, and very few of us know their names. But those two men, without them, being the Lord using them, we wouldn't be sitting here doing this. So being involved is not just being involved in politics. It's understanding that the Torah is so much bigger than religious observances. It impregnates every area of our life. It is doing the right thing. The Torah in completely boiled down is doing the right thing. Thought, word, and deed, doing the right thing. Don't harm anybody by thought, word, or deed. And if I see something that I can improve, I have a responsibility to take action on it.
That sounds like it would map onto local politics, at minimum.
I think that we've done ourselves a great disservice by sitting back and allowing culture to be created for us. Just to underscore the importance of recognizing that the Torah, I'm looking to the right, so.
I don't remember which way it was. Katie's going to tell me later that I was wrong, that it was the right, that was, whatever. I think either way is fine for thinking.
The Torah is, it's not a religious instrument. And it never was. It never was. It's a framework for how to properly live a practical life. Even in the little things, right? Cooking my food in the kitchen, mowing the yard, taking out the trash. All of that stuff is addressed. It's a practical device. And because we've not properly dealt with as a community And we love to talk about this Greek mindset, but we've still brought it in and done it again. We've made a Greek Torah. We've made a religious instrument and a religious device, and missed, I think, a lot of the just basic wisdom that it applies to everybody. The redemption that is found in Messiah is for the whole world, every culture, every language. And we're not going to be a big smushed together blob of no distinctions whenever we're coming together in the kingdom in the future. We're going to have our own unique traits and distinctions, and so we don't have to become something that we're not. The Torah is wide enough to be utilized by a couple Southern Ohio kids without turning us into something that's completely foreign to us. And now we have to pretend to be something that we're not.
So you're saying I can be an American who calls himself a Christian, who is also a Torah observer?
Wow. Yes. Yes. But there was a time in my life where I would have a hard time with that.
You're not alone.
And it was based in insecurity.
And maybe also the pendulum thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the rubber band thing.
Seasoning.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like you're like, well, this was wrong, so what else is wrong? And so I understand it, and I think I see why you and maybe me and maybe everyone does it. They're like, we got to swing as far as we got to swing to get out of Babylon, if you will, you know?
That's right.
And then it's like, well, is this really the right place to be, or is it like there? If I was over here, and then I went over here, and maybe I'm not seeing good fruit, then maybe there is somewhere in the middle without losing what we learned. Because I think where also the Torah movement can go bad, and went bad like long before we came into this, like with Worldwide Church of God and that sort of stuff, was that kids went away from those churches thinking that they had to earn their salvation, or that they even could.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean,
or they just were guilty. They were constantly guilty because, and so that's bad fruit.
I've done that to my kids. I've been that person. And, you know, I'm certainly not happy with that, but that's the reality of the situation is I think we all just came into this and threw it into gear and jammed the pedal down. And, you know, I think if I'm pretty hopeful now. I've talked to a lot of people who seem to be sort of kind of on the same page that I am. You know, if you've been around it, if you've been in it for 10 or more years or whatever, most people that I've talked to are kind of in this same place. And I'm very, very encouraged by that. But like we were talking earlier, movements sometimes take a life of their own, and you end up with very, very passionate people who don't have any grounding and can just take that thing and turn it into something that's very destructive.
What would you say to someone who grew up in the Torah from a childhood and saw some of the things that maybe you saw, only you were an adult? And then they left it, and they went back to mainstream Christianity, but they also left the Sabbath, and they left other of these few laws that we see as differentiators. What would you say to that person, if you would like to say anything?
My wife's met a woman who is actually older than us, who I don't know if she grew up in the Worldwide Church of God, but she grew up keeping the feasts and in the Torah, and she did that very thing, left it. And she said it was because there was no love. And I would say that because we've applied it the wrong way does not negate what it actually is, which is the truth. And that the law applied properly is the law of liberty. It's freedom. It's freeing. It's actually love. The law is actually love. Love the Shema. Love your neighbor. Love the Lord and love your neighbor. Jesus said, on all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. It is actually how to love. In reality, in truth. And I would say that you're right. You were right. But because we did it wrong doesn't make it wrong. We can't judge something else. We can't judge a thing by how somebody else has misinterpreted it. In my opinion. And so I think that we as a community, if we truly are going to get credibility with the Christian world around us, and I think we want that, I do. I think we should desire that. We need to build a bridge with our Christian brethren because they're the target, aren't they?
Not even of us, but of the Spirit.
Yes.
The Spirit is purposed to wake the rest of our Christian brothers up. Yes.
So if we're not open to valid criticisms about ourselves, then we're just faking and we're being exactly what people say that we are. And in a lot of realms, because I'm still very involved and engaged with a lot of Sunday Christian people, the attitude is that we're a bunch of arrogant, haughty, judgmental jerks. And I was that person. But I wasn't that person because I wanted to be that person. I was that person because I was insecure. And I was trying to prove myself. Because I was doing something different. And not just trusting the Father. Because I thought I had to change everybody's mind. I thought I had to win every argument. I thought that I had to pin somebody down to the ground with the 27 reasons why they were wrong and we were right, to show them that we're right. And I was never effective in that regard. So maybe that was a little bit long-winded to that question, but I think that person's criticisms are valid. I know I've been that person. So.
But you're saying don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If I can
mean,
just be so,
yeah, to simplify it, yeah, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because the Torah is not something that should be weight upon you, actually. It's the perfect law of liberty. So if it's weight upon us, we're doing it wrong. So, and hey, that's not everybody's doing that, right? There is some of the most amazing people in the whole world are in this community. I think what I'm just trying to illustrate is where I've come to are we've got some valid things that we should own up to
and stop doing.
It's
like there is a right way to do this. It doesn't have to be here. If we can go back to the pendulum thing, it Doesn't have to be here. And maybe it's not supposed to be, actually. Maybe we, pendulum has its upper limits for a reason, and it doesn't stay there. So, yeah. I don't want anyone to be like, taking this as being like, Luke's saying be lukewarm. I don't want that at all. I just don't want people to be false. And I don't want them to do things unnecessarily. And I don't want them to be bad examples of this beautiful truth that we found.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. If I would talk to myself 10 years ago, well, let's see. Probably more like 12 years ago. If I would have a conversation with myself now, I would say, stop being a jerk. Stop being a know-it-all. Recognize that you're in the beginning of something that's going to take a lot more time than you think it is. And you don't know nearly as much as you think that you do. Because if it doesn't play out in my life practically, then I'm not applying it correctly. And the last thing that you want to do is take on another religion. You don't want to exchange one religious cloak for another. You're genuinely trying to become like Yeshua, which is completely open, no fear, willing to sit down, have a conversation with anybody. You're not prickly, you're not edgy, you're not looking for an opportunity to get your shot in every second. That there's some real maturity there. And we're getting there, I think. I think we're getting there. I think the community as a whole is sort of kind of going through this whole same process that I've experienced in my life. Not that I'm there, but I'm encouraged by it. I am.
Maybe the only other thing I'd ask you that I would like to cover about local politics is and politics statewide and nationwide is, what are the stakes? What are the stakes? Or at least what are the stakes that you've noticed?
In the short term, I don't know that the stakes impact me as much as it does my children and my grandchildren. And wasn't it Hezekiah that the Lord said, hey, I'm going to come and bring this judgment, but it's not going to happen in your generation. And he was like, oh, good. And I've always had a problem with that. I kind of one day I want to ask him about it. Like, were you happy that, didn't you care about your future descendants? Or were you just trying to get out on your own? And I don't mean that disrespectfully to him. I'm genuinely curious about it. I don't want to take that approach. And so the stakes are that if I'm wrong about the imminency of either the kingdom being ushered in and everything going bad and then Yeshua coming and saving it, like if I'm wrong about that, then that's going to shape what I do right now. I mean, you can't not. In my opinion, eschatology drives current actions. It's why it's a thing we have to wrestle with. But that's what the stakes are, is if I'm wrong and that doesn't happen for another 100 years or 200 years. And I know that's hard to wrap our minds around, but it was also hard for to use a very bad example, but like, you had the Seventh-day Adventists in 1888 and you've had a lot of different groups who knew that it was going to happen at this time, and people they made decisions based on that. Some of them wiped out their inheritance to go, and there are people who sold everything and went. I don't know that these were actual real Christian people, but they went and sat on a mountaintop waiting on a UFO to come and pick them up. Okay. But if you stretch that out, it's not a whole lot different than waiting on Jesus to come back and save us. It's just a different mechanism. I'm not saying that those people are believers, and I'm not equating the two, but the mindset is the same. I'm going to sit here and not do anything until Jesus shows up and bails me out. And if I'm wrong about that, the stakes are the problem that I have with Hezekiah taking that approach is I'm good with me right now, but my kids, I guess they're just going to have to fend for themselves. And that's not scriptural. A righteous man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. Those are the stakes. The stakes are I may not have to necessarily see the results of my inactivity, but my descendants will. And I think they're very high. The stakes are very high. We're very close to bloodshed and armed conflict in our nation. I think we're very close, and I don't want that to happen. We're 2 inches from a civil war if we take the assassination attempt on Trump. That hits him in the head. We're in an immediate civil war, and so that gives me hope that the Lord hasn't given up on America, as bad as we've become. Because if I'm not teaching him how to take down a nation, but if that's a really good way to do it, is you take out a very, very popular and populous presidential candidate in a very, very tense time, and you assassinate him on live TV, and then society breaks down. Thank God that did not hit him, because our civility would have snapped, in my opinion, at that point. Civility in this nation, and so the stakes are very, very high. And politics are not the answer. I hope people aren't taking that as like, hey, we're gonna win this through the ballot box. That's not what it is. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the body of Christ is the ruling authority in the earth right now, and we ought to conduct ourselves as such. And that's in every area of our society. And as a result of that, everything will get better. Everything will get better by nature of the blessings of the Torah. We've got to be involved. It's our mandate to be involved. We are the ruling authority submitted to him in the earth. We have power and authority granted unto us through him to bring about restoration in the earth, to ultimately get back to Garden of Eden. And so the stakes are very high. Temporary. I mean, ultimately it's going to happen, but we have the ability to either be one of the upswings or one of the downswings, and it's our choice. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. So then, okay, still kind of in this vein of Torah and policy and all of that. Okay, what do you say to the guy who is convinced 100% that, like, Yeshua is going to return in 2030? Let's say that. What do you say to this guy? And, yeah, be right or wrong, I guess.
I would say that plant a tree. Because there's going to be trees in the kingdom. If he's coming back, then the kingdom's being brought in. Okay? So get about doing Torah things in the earth. steward the land that you're in charge of. The mandate doesn't change. It doesn't change. Sequentially, Adam was told to take dominion over the earth. That dominion was lost. That dominion was regained and realized in Christ and delegated back unto us to go and bring that about. There's not a thing in the scripture that the Lord has said to do that won't ultimately occur. He doesn't waste mandates or commandments. He doesn't say something that won't happen. Okay? In Hebrews, it says that God calls things that are not as though they are. And so whether he's coming back in 2030 or 2730 makes no difference to me. It doesn't change what I'm responsible for doing right now, which is continuing to labor in the garden and the harvest and set it up for the next generation and pass on an inheritance to my children's children. It doesn't change. That's what I would say. And if it causes me to change my behavior and think narrow-mindedly, then I've interpreted it incorrectly. Because we're going to be working after Yeshua comes back. We're going to be, we're going to be farming. We're going to be, every man's going to sit under his own fig tree. So I would say, plant a fig tree. Right? The mandate doesn't change. And that's where I think we've been duped. We're waiting on the bus to show up. Why are we doing that for?
I think it's because, partially, it's because we aren't playing it out all the way. Because the truth is, yes, if there's some difficult times right before he comes, so be it. It'll give anyone a chance to become a martyr. And what else would you want, really, if we think about this the way the Bible would have us? And then after that, there will be a ruler on earth who is Yeshua himself, ruling with a rod of iron and making life here the way that it should be on heaven. Right. That's the whole prayer. And so if we can't get it done before he gets here, then he's going to get it done. So it all just continues. It's exactly like you said. It's actually a hopeful, wonderful, awesome thing. So if he does come back in 2030, that's great, because then we can continue to conquer with him, with the power of the power vested in him, which is way greater. But until then, are we going to be unproductive servants? I mean,
this is a fear-based mindset. Fear produces death. Fear paralyzes. Fear does not reproduce after itself. And that's my belief. It's a fear-based mindset.
Will the fearful inherit the kingdom of heaven?
They will not. They will not. And that's the scary thing, because that's the Lord told let's take the 10 spies. A great example of exactly what we're talking about. He said, go take the land. Go spy it out. Tell me how good it is. They come back, they go in, they spy it out. It's amazing. It's exactly what you said it was. Okay, great. Go take the land. We can't do that. There's giants in there. Now, what he said to them after that was, because you saw me in this manner that I brought you out into the wilderness to kill you, I'm going to become to you exactly what you made me into. You're going to die in the wilderness. I will be a God who brought you out of Egypt and could not take you into the promised land. That's exactly what happened. So it ought to be very sobering if we're living in that fear-based mindset. The reality is, no matter how bad the situation is, I don't have permission to become fearful. Fearful for me is my cloak to not do anything, for me personally. Sometimes I shield myself with fear so I don't have to do anything. So I just think it's a very dangerous place to be.
Me too.
I don't want this interview to be so solemn. Provision is there for us. But no matter what situation we find ourselves in, the provision is still there. Okay? He told Pharaoh he raised him up in order to show his power. Every battle, every giant, everything that's placed before me is an opportunity that he is showing himself mighty on my behalf. It says he looks far and wide for those that he can show himself mighty on their behalf. That fearful thing is the gate into the next season. And because we're right around the feast days, and I like to say this, and I hope this makes this into the final cut. Every feast day turns a new season, both in the earth and in our lives. It's an opportunity to start fresh and start new. Every turning of the seasons is a new opportunity. Okay, so we're going now into the fall. We're about to hit the feast days. It's not only a change of the seasons out here in the world, but it's an opportunity for a change of season in our lives. Generally, it comes with a trial. I mean, just scripturally, going from one season to the next, you'll see over and over and over again, there was a crisis or a trial or whatnot. Okay? That trial and that crisis is the gateway into the new pasture. We can either go through it or we can turn around and go back into the previous season where there's no grass. And I got some farm animals I told you about, and I rotate them on the grass. I can either take them to the next pasture or they can stay in the same one where they've already eaten it down and beaten it down and everything else. And that's kind of how I see the feast days for us as believers. It's an opportunity to go into a new pasture. But generally that gateway that opens up is a trial or a crisis or a challenge that we've got to go through. And there's growth through that into the next one. The trial of your faith works patience. Patience, experience, hope. Hope makes us not ashamed.
That's cool. It's cool because the animals never really they want to stay where they are usually.
No, they never want to. And the reality of sheep is that it's not a compliment. I hope I don't offend anybody with sheep. I have some sheep. In fact, I just sold off all my sheep. Sheep are dumb. They're flighty. They're fearful. And they will run in the wrong direction if somebody else is going in that direction. They will look up and they'll see somebody go in that direction, and they immediately will and you get them out and you'll have them just running all over the place. It's not a compliment. I actually like the goats better than I do the sheep. I sold off all my sheep and now I only have goats. Which is, people are gonna be like, this guy, he's all into the goats and he's friends with the witches and all this and that.
Oh my gosh.
I think that's that fear, man. That's really, if I had to be honest about myself, what holds me back from trying to create culture in the world around me, it's fear. I'm afraid.
So if you can remove that fear, then what would you do? Then you would create culture in the world around you.
Yeah, because if you're if you're taking land properly and biblically and righteously, you won't fail.
When did we start as a church body body of the Messiah. When did we start going on the back foot?
Man, that's a good question. Darby, maybe? Schofield Reference Bible? Pre-tribulation rapture? British Mandate, Israel becoming a nation, 1948. I mean, probably in the 1900s, I think. I don't know. I haven't really looked into it, but if I, that doctrine that in that Schofield Reference Bible that was so popular, it taught all of those doctrines. It reshaped the world, man. The Christian world, at least, the Western Christian world, I should say.
Because before that, it was, what was the name? What would they say?
Manifest Destiny.
So before that, it's Manifest Destiny. Before that, it's progress. It's progress. And without progress, people aren't satisfied. They aren't happy. They aren't fulfilled.
Well, we're always moving, either forward or backward.
Yeah.
We're never stagnant.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that there weren't a lot. There's a lot of bad that happened through all of that. I'm not saying that everything with the Pilgrims and the Puritans and all of that stuff, I'm not saying that everything was great, but generally heading in the right direction. It was generally going in the right direction. And even now, I mean, let's take this thing. This thing is the cause of a lot of evil, but it is also an opportunity for a lot of good.
Fruit of knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a Bible in my pocket. I've got a supercomputer. Nebuchadnezzar, the ability to accumulate knowledge is one of the greatest sources of wealth in the history of mankind. Nebuchadnezzar would have wasted his whole kingdom to have an iPhone. The access to the libraries of information that we have access to. And I can turn on the scriptures.
As to full, when Mordecai perceived all that was...
And I can listen to somebody read me the scriptures. When 500 years ago, it would have been a death penalty for somebody to have a personal copy of the scriptures. Even in Protestant England, they weren't allowed to have the scriptures up into the 1600s, right? So the idea that we can do this and we can have this, I mean, for one, it gives me no excuse whatsoever to not be very immersed in the scriptures. I can put it on and listen to the scriptures three or four chapters at a time, and it takes like 10 minutes. I mean, nobody alive today has any excuse to not be getting through the scriptures at the very minimum one time per year, with the fact that we all have iPhones and all of that. But I mean, that's beside the point. The blessings of electricity came from a Christian nation. It's the product of Torah blessing. Running water, sanitation, a toilet, that's Torah. Clean dishes, that's Torah. Right? We don't think of that like that, but it is. So we're living in a society that's incredibly blessed with the fruits of Torah in the most practical, everyday life way. And it's very easy to not see that and get very caught up in flair. So we just got to keep moving the ball forward, in my opinion.
Where can people find you?
I'm a member of Carmel Christian Center. We're in Plain City, Ohio. I get to preach there from time to time, and I try to maintain their YouTube page as much as I can. I'm not always up to date with it and everything. So you can find us there. There's good teaching there. I have a personal YouTube page that I'm trying to start called True Roots Ministries. And True Roots is essentially, it's kind of a play on the Hebraic roots, and being that Yeshua is the root. So the true root is him. He is the root of David, right? And so I've got some teachings and things up there, and I have a desire to start really creating content. What I want to do is start at the beginning of the scriptures and just go from end to end and do a very basic Bible study, as if I'm teaching my kids, because I think a lot of people, from a practical standpoint, don't properly understand the scriptures. And so I'm going to start doing that very soon. I'm assembling my equipment and trying to get my studio right in my basement and all of that. True Roots Ministries, it's on YouTube. Ultimately, I've got some people in my life that have a desire to start a local church. We're still hammering that out, what that looks like, and praying on it, and haven't really been released to step into that yet. The Lord told me when I went to Carmel that I was there until the elders said it was time for us to leave. So that will be the release, that he'll tell them that. And until then, I'm just being a dad. And there's another, if you're into politics, I have a friend that I'm helping. I'm doing some editing. He has a YouTube channel called Stand and Speak with Lad Dilgard. He's a guy that I've been working with locally in local politics and things like that. And so I've got my hands in a lot of things kind of behind the scenes. But for me, if you're looking just specifically for me, it's True Roots Ministries on YouTube. And later down the road, we'll probably expand that into some other stuff.
That's cool. We'll link to all of that. And then maybe one more, at least, question, if you don't mind. Yeah. All right, let's say someone listening thought, okay, I think Eric is right. I think I need to start being more active in my local area. Where do I start? And this is so daunting. I mean, I probably should have asked this like an hour ago. But yeah, where should people start?
I am a firm believer in getting involved in what you're interested in. So God gives us desires. He puts talents in our hearts. And I'll give you an example. I coach him in his cross-country team. And so it might seem like a benign thing, but having been I think by sheer nature of us being there and the Spirit of God being there, they're praying before they're praying. I mean, I'll show you some pictures here where they're circled up, they're praying over each other before their meets. Kids are doing, bringing their own Bible verses and talking, in the teams. It's all voluntary. Like we're removed from it, but just by nature of being there and being involved, we've almost got like this little mini spark of revival that's happening on this middle school cross country team. So I would say get involved where you're interested in that's external in your community, whatever that looks like, whether that's at your church. Every church needs help. Whether that's helping with a local organization. I mean, we actually need to get out there and do some stuff, and we just need to be unapologetically Christian while we're out there. It's not like we have to, walk in with our billboards, but just be who it is that we are. Go get involved in your local school district. That's the next generation of people that are going to be shaping society. Those kids are going to be adults very, very soon. So get involved and understand what's happening locally. What are they teaching in there? Go to a school board meeting. Don't be a jerk at the school board meeting and burn any opportunity for a bridge to build with some of the administration. And to use an example, I had a call with one of the former directors of the curriculum of our school district. And this person told me, she said, I believe exactly the way that you do. The problem that we have, this was at the very beginning of us getting involved in our school stuff. She said, the problem that we have is we don't have Christian people who are showing up at the PTO meetings or being involved in the various councils and things. Every school needs parental assistance. You can be a part of an organization with the school. And she said, none of you people are involved in any of these. It's only the other side. And they're making all the decisions for everybody because none of you guys are involved. That's what she told me. She said, I want you people to be involved. But here's the problem. The people that are actually making the decisions are only hearing ever one side of the argument. That's all they're hearing. So they make decisions based on what they're hearing. And we flipped that. Now we're driving what's going on in our school. It's been very volatile. I mean, we had mass disruptions at our school board meetings on the other side, and people waving their flags and everything else and getting escorted out with the police. I mean, we were on the news like 3 or 4 different times. And but we're the ones driving what's happening in our school now. And then I would take it a next step further is if you have a school board member that's a Christian, a conservative at minimum, or a Christian, great. Reach out to that person and support them. Let them know you're thankful that they're out there. That is a stinking hard job. It really is. It's thankless. They don't get paid anything. They volunteer most of their time. They get a couple $100 or something. I think they get ours get like $25 per meeting or something like that. And they get screamed at once a month. I mean, just give them a little encouragement. Doesn't take a lot, right? But if a bunch of us are doing a little bit, it has a mass effect. It's a multiplier. That's what I would say. Just get involved somewhere. Find a place. If you coach your kids' sports, pray for the team. If I'm a coach of a kid's sport, I'm an authority. I'm a legal authority in the earth, right? So now I have access to the Father to pray for these kids, and I have authority over them. So I have a direct line to bring His blessings upon these kids just by nature of praying for them. And I can do that in private. So that's what I would say. Find someplace you're interested in and just do something. Everybody can do it. If you're a good cook, go cook. If you're good at hospitality, go. Isn't this what Paul told us? If you're good at hospitality, be hospitable. Right? Whatever it is that you're good at, you're a part of the body. Not everybody's the eye. Right? But we all have our own little part. Whatever you're good at, go get involved in what you're good at. God gave that gift to you. Use it.
I love that. Okay, shoot, I have one more.
You're fine.
I have one more. What are your thoughts on progressive Christianity? And what are the dangers of it, if there are any?
I've got some friends whom I consider friends. Okay, so I like to run. I run ultra marathons. There's not a lot of people out there that want to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go and run 20 miles. So that my scope of people to do with that with is very narrow. But I've got some friends that are very left leaning. And one in particular, I mean, we've had some really amazing. We ran an ultra marathon together. You go into some really weird places when you're super. In fact, we did it right over here at Great Seal. We ran 32 miles over at Great Seal. Well, you get into some weird places when you're out there in the woods and you're half dehydrated and hungry and everything else. And you just get into some conversations and you get really vulnerable with each other because it's very raw and primal. And it's, you're almost in this like shared suffering. And I've gotten he would be a very, very good Christian. And I think his head and heart are directionally pointed in the right direction, in that he genuinely wants the best for people, wants people loved and cared for, which is a good thing. he is just, I believe, misguided on how that plays out. What actually is the truth about love? So the progressive Christian, I think, has good intentions. But the Bible says the heart is deceitfully wicked above all things. Who can know it? And so just because I have good intentions doesn't mean I'm right. And I can be very sincere and be very sincerely wrong. And I can be very sincerely destructive, thinking that I'm doing a good thing. And I think the progressive Christians have a desire for people to be loved, but I believe they're unhooked from the scriptures on what love actually is. And so if I don't, this plays for the Sunday Christian, we're a legal-minded species. Human beings created in the image of God are going to serve a God through a law. And if we're not serving the true God with his true law, we're going to make a God in our own image with a made-up law that we're going to adhere to and force others to abide by. And so the most religious people are the progressives. And because they need a law to follow, their law is progressivism. But there's no end to it because it's not defined.
This is what's, again, a strength about the Torah movement is that we are grounded in sovereign morality, not morality that can shift.
That's right. And I would say, so the progressive Christian isn't really much different than a lot of Sunday Christians. It's just Sunday Christians have defined their law just a little bit of a step further back, right? And think about the idea of conservative. That's a death-based mindset anyway. What are we trying to conserve? We should be created. We shouldn't be conserving anything. We should be creating culture. What are we conserving? So if we're thinking from a conservative mindset, we're just lagging behind progressivism a number of years, however many that is. If I'm not actively going forward and creating culture, then it's being created for me. And so I'm just going to lag behind. It won't be long. This is why the Republican Party came out as pro-choice this year. What else is there? It's the voting bloc, right? I mean, they've got to reach people based on what people's worldview are. So if we're not creating that and it's being created for us, we're just going to lag behind progressivism by a number of years, however many that may be. So I can understand why progressive Christians are where they are. They're non-confrontational to a certain degree. They want people to be loved, but I believe they've defined love as don't hurt anybody's feelings. So now you're serving a God that can change on a whim, and you have to assent to whatever anybody says. And that's the strength of the Torah. It's why we need the Torah. But here's the thing. None of this stuff should be in the body of Christ anyway. And it was there in various seed formats for a long time. So the fact that it's manifesting itself now may not necessarily be a bad thing. We see it as bad. Paul told us that trials in the present time are not pleasurable. But perhaps the Father is just bringing these things to the surface to break them off. That's it. That's the way we have to perceive every trial. And if my worldview is that, getting back to this, not to get away from this, I don't know that we can get away from this eschatology thing, but if that's the way I perceive the world, then every crisis and every trial is the end, or it's right around the corner. It might actually be, or it's getting really, really bad. No, maybe it's about to get really, really good. because it got really, really bad when the father rose up Pharaoh, right? But he said the only reason he rose him up was to destroy him and show his power. It was really, really bad when the bitter waters were there. But he brought them to the bitter waters to show them he can make the bitter waters clean. It was really, really bad when they didn't have food. But he showed them that they were in a desert with their children and their livestock with no food, that he could provide food for them for 40 years. So it was really, really bad when they saw the giants in the land. And he put those giants there to destroy them. And the next generation that actually went into the land did destroy them. It's all in how we see it.
It was really, really bad in World War II.
Yeah. It was. It was. And you see this in Isaiah. And he says, Isaiah chapter 8, and he's talking about when the land is being invaded, and it's starting in verse 19. It says, and when they say unto you, seek unto them that have familiar spirits, and unto wizards that peep and that mutter, should not a people seek unto their God? For the living to the dead, to the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, is because there is no light in them. And they shall pass through it, hardly bestead and hungry, and it shall come to pass, this is the children of Israel, that when they shall be hungry, they shall fret themselves, and curse their king and their God, and look upward. They'll look up to God, and they shall look unto the earth, and behold, they will behold the trouble and the darkness, and the dimness of anguish. They'll look to God, and then they'll look to the earth, and they will behold the earth and the darkness, and they shall be driven to darkness. And that's a lesson for all of us on how we see the world. When we see darkness as the victor, it's going to draw us to darkness.
Eric, thank you for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you for having me.
It was beautiful.